Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. My name is Febby, and I'm about to walk you through how you can start your own bullet journal. Before we get started, take some time to get yourself comfortable, or better yet, grab your own bullet journal and plan for the upcoming fall semester with me. To begin, I just want to say that I'm not an expert or anything like that. In fact, I only just recently got into bullet journaling around this time last year, but it's definitely changed my life. The best part about bullet journaling and the initial reason I was so drawn in when I first started is that it's all completely personalized. You can make bullet journals into anything you want them to be. They can be used for artistic expression, academic organization, daily journaling, scrapbooking, anything you want it to be, really. But for the purpose of today, I thought I would just show you my bullet journal and the way I like to use it. However, I will ask you to keep two things in mind as we go through this process. One, there is no right or wrong way to go about bullet journaling. There's only the way you want to do it. And two, that we should embrace any mistakes we make along the way. Mistakes can and unfortunately will happen, but we shouldn't dwell on them. And if anything, I like to think that the many mistakes I've made in my journal only add to its charm and were ways to make myself discover more creative solutions. But without further ado, let's get started. To begin, let's go over some of the materials you'll need before we can actually start working on our bullet journals. The most important and one of the only necessary items on this list is a notebook, which I'll just refer to as a book from now on. The great thing about bullet journaling is that nothing is strictly done one specific way, so you can use any type of book you could possibly want. However, there are a few factors you might want to consider when choosing which book might be best for you. A larger book might be really good for someone that is thinking about writing in their journal in the form of daily entries, or if you just personally like to have a lot of page space to work with. Meanwhile, someone might prefer a smaller book because they want it to be super portable or don't plan on creating any complicated layouts. I personally have an average size bullet journal, and it's what I would typically go for because I like to use mine for academic planning, and that definitely requires a significant amount of page space. But I still wanted to ensure that my book would be small enough to fit into any of my bags so that I can take it with me to a lab or to class or even to the library while I'm studying. Another important thing to consider is what kind of pages do you want? Do you prefer lined, dotted, graph, or blank paper? Each of these come with their own perks, as dotted and blank paper allow for optimal artistic flow, while graph and line paper are really good for precise and meticulous designs. Now, that is a lot of information to throw your way, but I want to emphasize that you don't have to go out and buy a whole new book to match your needs unless you want to. You can really use any book you have lying around because that's what I did. I originally was hoping to get a book full of blank paper so that I could organize it the way I wanted it to look like. But I found this beautiful book lying around, and now I love having lined paper, and I couldn't imagine what I would do without it. Once your book is settled, we can actually start looking at the materials you'll need to decorate and write in your book with. You can use pens, pencil crayons, markers, highlighters, stickers, washi tape, anything you want to use, really. I've even seen people use paint in their bullet journals. I personally only use pens and highlighters for my weekly planning, but sometimes I like to be a bit more decorative for my semester layouts since I have a bit more time to work on them. But once we have our materials set up and everything is ready to go, we can actually get started on the fun part, the spreads. So, I personally think it's super important to have a key or some sort of page where you explain all of the short forms you'll be using. And the reason why I say this is because using short forms is extremely helpful. It makes your pages a lot easier to read, and it just reduces the amount of actual words you have to write down to get a point across to yourself. So it's really, really important to be able to memorize all the short forms that you either plan to use or are currently using. And it's really helpful in the beginning to have this page when you might not remember all of the symbols that you want to be using for the next little while. Or, on the other hand, if you're super duper organized and you plan really far ahead in one sitting, you might eventually run across a symbol that you don't remember. So it's really, really helpful to have a page like this where you can just reference all of the symbols that you have been using and be able to understand what each of them mean. So to give you guys a bit of an example or a few examples of what short forms and symbols could look like, I personally like to use these. So there's a minimalistic clock to basically represent any deadlines I may have, a circle for tasks where the amount of this circle that is filled in is equivalent to how much of the task I have completed. I use triangles for events that could be academic or personal. I also like to use a little gift box for birthdays, little arrows for any tests, a star for any extracurricular tasks, a circle with a dot in it for meetings, and a few other symbols to represent what my day looked like. On this page, I also like to include a grade conversion chart, where your marks in percentages are converted to the 12-point, 4-point, and letter scale, as I always seem to forget how to go in between all of them, and this is just kind of a nice spot to include it. This comes in handy when you want to know what your anticipated grade may be in a course, because you'll receive individual grades as a percentage, but your final grade is according to the 12-point scale, and graduate schools will look at your grades in the 4-point scale. So having access to this conversion chart can make those grade conversions so much faster. Next, I like to have a double page spread for the layout of the semester I am preparing for. On one page, I begin to write out the information for each course I'm taking, and this can consist of any information my professors and TAs provide about their office hours, where I can find them, and their preferred method of contact. By that, I mean, do they prefer us going to visit them in person, or would they rather we email them with our questions? At the moment, since classes haven't really started yet, there's only so much information available to me through course outlines, so I haven't really been able to fill out all of the information I typically would. And I've written it in pencil right now because I want to be able to wait until classes begin so that I can confirm with my professors that all of the information on the course outline, or at least all of the information that I have written down, is exactly what they prefer. Since classes are also online this semester, I am taking the time to try and figure out which of my courses are going to be live and which of them will be asynchronous. This is going to be extremely helpful as I work towards creating a weekly schedule for myself so that I can begin to plan around which courses I have to physically attend and which courses I will be able to watch and take notes on at my own time. I also like to use this page as an opportunity to color code my courses. This makes my life so much easier later on when I go to write out tasks for myself, because now I can just write out the task for a specific course in that course color rather than having to write out all of that information together in one go. And this just makes it so much easier to read and be able to immediately understand what it is that I'm referring to. On the other page, I will create a weekly chart where I basically copy out my semester schedule so that I can have a physical reference for when everything will be. And this way, I just have it written out somewhere on something that I always have with me so I can immediately check it if I ever forget what my next class is. And this is also extremely useful for when I have to figure out if I'm free or busy anytime during the week. And eventually, I'll also start scheduling in whenever I have club meetings or if the Pulse were open or if classes were not online, when I would take a class at the Pulse or perhaps maybe spend some time with my friends or schedule in any time that I would go to the library to study. After this, I quickly make a fairly minimal and open calendar for the 4-month semester. I do it this way because it takes up less space, but still allows me to get a full semester's look at when things will be due or when I may have big things coming up. I usually put in birthdays, due dates, midterms, events, anything I want to remember really. And again, this calendar will be color coded for my courses, and I'll also be using any short forms I mentioned previously on my key page just to make things easier to read. And it also helps me save space. This also works to basically make it so that I can look at the days and just recognize the symbols to prepare myself without necessarily having to read the content that I've written out below. But it's just really nice to be able to have both options so I can read things in detail while also still just being able to quickly glance at it and recognize if I do have something coming up. This layout is also great because it allows me to add things throughout the semester without overcrowding the calendar on specific days, and it allows me to identify any weeks that might be super busy or free so that I can plan accordingly. As of right now, I've only really added birthdays and the day that classes start. But once our courses begin, I'll slowly add in due dates for any assignments, any days that I might have a midterm or an exam, or even just events that my program society might be hosting, or a event that a club is hosting that I really want to attend. Anything like that, really. Once this is done, I basically create a grades chart for each of the courses I'm taking that semester. It's a pretty simple table with 4 columns that consist of the due date, my grade, how much this contributes to my final grade, and the title of the assessment. This way, I can have a visual mark by mark breakdown of how I'm doing in each course. It really helps to have this because I can immediately have an updated idea of how I'm doing in a class. Because sometimes you may receive your grade for an assessment, but it might not get updated onto Avenue. So it's nice to have a location where you can manually update it all and watch your progress. And it works especially well so you don't have to go back and forth between courses on Avenue to see where you're at in terms of your grades. Since I take 5 courses, it always leaves me with an odd page left out, so I've started to convert this page into a spending log. This works to basically keep track of my money flow, which is important as a university student. I'll typically keep track of groceries, textbooks, every time I spend money on anything really. And if there are any small purchases that I'm making throughout the week, like on coffee or on snacks, I'll typically add them up at the end of the week and include them that way so that I don't take up too much space by small purchases. But this basically works to give me a visual of where my money is going so that I can budget accordingly throughout the semester. And it's also really nice to have a summary of how much you typically spend per semester so you have an idea of how much money you may need in the future for spending purposes. For the time being, I've kind of just put in some examples so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like when I add money that I'm gaining and money that I'm losing on this chart. I also like to begin with only one chart on the page so that I don't necessarily overwhelm myself with the potential room I have to make purchases. And it basically works to remind myself to not go overboard with spending. Now that we're done all of that, we can begin the layout that I have to repeat every week, as it basically displays my tasks for that week ahead. It's nothing special as it's primarily for functionality reasons, and I've kept it super simple so I can quickly draw it up whenever I have time at the start of the week. I basically create 4 columns on each page, one for each day of the week, and one for what I like to call brain dumping. It's basically where I put in random things that I have on my mind that I want to remember later, but I know that I'll probably forget. So, for example, I may add the name of a really cool event I want to go to, or maybe an app that someone recommended, or a paper that the prof suggests I read. Anything along those lines, really. And it helps me keep track of all of that information so I don't have to go around hunting for it later on when I find it to be important. Once the chart is set up for the week, I like to basically decorate it with a little bit of color just so that it looks a little more fun. Sometimes I'll even write out the date and the month that we're currently in. And in this case, it would be September, as I'm lining this up for the fall semester. And I basically will write out the date and the month that we're in a creative font or just something fun and colorful. And as you can see, I totally made a mistake with the dates for that week. And so I basically covered up the dates I got wrong with some washi tape. Some might even say that the washi tape could look totally intentional. Others might say it looks messy, but I fixed my mistake and I'm happy with the results. So take it as you will. After that's done, I will add in any events, tasks, due dates, or just something that I might have coming up coming up in the week so I know to be prepared. But again, since classes haven't started yet, my week looks pretty empty. But once classes start, the days will become full of tasks ranging from reading a chapter in a textbook to completing a lab. Then below this, I have two charts that I use as habit trackers. I make one for studying and one for sleeping. These charts are fairly simple. I basically track how much I sleep each night and how much I've worked on each course each day. I originally started tracking my sleeping habits as a way to make myself more aware of how poorly I was sleeping, as I would go from sleeping 4 hours one day to 9 hours the next. Overall, I felt like I wasn't getting a consistent good night's rest. So, by having to physically record how irregular and how little I was sleeping, I've been able to make it much more consistent, as I'll feel more accomplished when the chart is more level in comparison to the guilt I would feel when it's very jagged. It's also important to get a good night's sleep because you never want to walk into a lab or any form of assessment really feeling restless. And as someone who has done it before, I can verify that it can make a simple task feel a lot harder than it really is. Although it seems almost tedious to track how much I'm studying or working on each course each day, I've realized that I truly needed it to recognize that sometimes I hyper-focus on a few courses at a time and ignore the rest. This, in the past, has led to a lot of stress and anxiety, as I would fall behind in a few courses while being ahead in others. Once I started tracking the hours, I began recognizing where I was lacking and started balancing my time across all 5 courses so that I was allotting an equal amount of effort for all of them. My goal wasn't necessarily to make sure that I was spending the exact same amount of time on each course, but more so to ensure that I was working on each course every single day or at least every other day, so that I was continuously putting in the effort for all 5 courses versus hyper focusing on 1 or 2 courses each day. At this point in time, I've been tracking my sleep for nearly a year now, and I've basically been able to stabilize it to something that I'm super happy with, and I don't feel like I need to be recording it anymore. So for now, I'm considering incorporating a daily gratitude chart into my weekly spread instead to replace that sleep habit tracker. And like I've said before, this is one of the greatest things about bullet journals is that you can really be super versatile and be switching in and out all sorts of different layouts and different trackers to work with your lifestyle and your desires for your journal. But back to my gratitude chart. Being in such unprecedented times, it can be difficult to not find yourself focusing on the devastating conditions of the world, or even how this year of university is not at all what you were expecting. Which is why I think writing around 2 to 4 things that you're grateful for each day can be important. They don't necessarily have to be anything along the lines of a huge accomplishment, although they could be. The important thing is to really find things that bring you joy and make you happy. For example, if I were filling out my gratitudes for today, I might include that I made a really good cup of coffee, that I set up my journal for the semester, and that the weather today was absolutely beautiful. Doing this regularly can help us recognize the good things in our lives, which we don't do nearly as frequently as we recognize the bad. I would say at the end of the day, this is just how I like to organize myself and my thoughts into a book. But you can totally add or remove any of the elements and spreads I've shown so far. There are plenty of ways you can make your bullet journal your own, and that is my favorite part about all of this. Although my layouts are more practical, some of my friends use theirs to track mindfulness habits, others use it to practice their artistic abilities, and a few even use it to record their life so they can look back on it in the future. Bullet journaling is all about creativity and personalization, and I, for one, am really excited to see what you guys can create. So thank you for taking the time to go through this video and for planning the fall semester that we are about to start with me. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys are excited for the rest of Welcome Week and to begin classes soon.